Today's coverage is brought to you in part by the General Foods family of fine products, pleasing you and your family for over 50 years. American Gas, your gas company, providing efficient gas energy for today and tomorrow. Bounty, the quicker picker-upper, and Crisco oil for fried foods that don't taste greasy and salads with no heavy, oily taste. Now reporting from the United States Capitol, here are NBC News correspondents Roger Mudd and John Chancellor.
And good morning from the west front of the Capitol. Roger.
John?
All of you.
Up to Capitol Hill via the White House. And I think now we're about to find some important folks coming out.
Chancellor.
Senator Hatfield arrives at this position by virtue of being chairman of the Senate Rules Committee, and that once every 4 years devolves into chairman of the Joint Inaugural Committee. It is an honor that he has acquired by virtue of the Republican victory last fall in the Senate. Republicans being in charge, he acquired the position of chairman of that committee. Congressman Rhodes was the Republican minority leader in the last Congress when the Inaugural Committee was established. He still is, although he's no longer the minority leader of the Republicans in the House. Blair House has an enormous green awning that hangs out over the street. It's probably the second most famous address on Pennsylvania Avenue. It's been the temporary abode of kings and presidents and prime ministers and potentates for quite a long time. Harry Truman lived here during much of his first years in office while the White House was being renovated. And it was here that there was an assassination attempt on him by some Puerto Rican nationals. Now we have a photographer clicking his way. Here comes Mrs. Reagan. Here comes the president-elect. Congressman Rhodes and the senator behind them.
Governor,
Waves.
any late word on the hostage situation?
Nothing since I came in.
Nothing.
He says no late word on the hostages since he re-entered the house after the church service. There's a great deal of protocol involved in all this. Everybody who is assigned to the party has to ride in a specific car. And there is an absolute glut of official limousines and security station wagons on Pennsylvania Avenue. What's going to happen here in a moment or two, John and Roger, is that this enormous caravan will try to execute a neat 180-degree turn, go back up Pennsylvania Avenue in the general direction of the Capitol, but turn into the northwest gate of the White House, where the Carters will presumably be on the front steps to greet them. The limo is beginning to move, and now let's see how neatly they can make this turn. Well, not bad so far. It is a drive of about 300 yards. Caravan is moving very slowly. Some of the security people and staff people are walking across the street. It's not a bad walk. It takes about 4 minutes to walk, and at this rate, it should take them about that long to get over there by car. Waves from the crowd. These stands will be filled up completely by the time the parade comes back down the street bearing President Reagan. Right now, they're fairly empty as President-elect Reagan heads toward the White House, where John Palmer is standing out front, waiting to watch the caravan come in.
It is Judy Woodruff, not John Palmer. We're both here together, but I am standing near the northwest gate where Mr. Reagan's motorcade is beginning to enter the grounds of the White House, the new home for Ronald and Nancy Reagan. This is a moment of high drama and a moment of great suspense here at the White House. There are many reporters still gathered in the briefing room at the White House as Mr. Reagan arrives, waiting for the last word on whether or not the hostages have actually taken off in a plane and left Tehran. We are at this moment waiting for that word. The Reagan limousine is approaching the north portico where President and Mrs. Carter are standing. You can see them now. The Reagans are being helped out. President and Mrs. Carter come down the steps. They shake hands, smile, exchange a few words of greeting. We are told that they will spend about 25 minutes in the Blue Room here on the state floor of the White House. They will have juice and coffee or tea if they prefer. It's called a tea ceremony, but what they will actually be drinking, we're told, is probably coffee, and they'll be served pastries if anybody's hungry, which probably isn't likely at this moment. It won't be as private a ceremony, actually, as you might think, because there'll be about 20 or 25 people in the room, in addition to the Carters and the Reagans, Vice President Mrs. Mondale, Vice President-elect and Mrs. Bush. The officers of the inaugural committee will be there with them. The members of the Congressional Escort Committee, they will all be sitting together in the Blue Room. We are told that this is normally a rather formal gathering. Obviously, there will be some talk about the latest developments in the hostage situation, but we are told that they probably will be discussing the weather.
Judy?
And not a whole lot of small talk. John,
Judy,
I think I hear you.
I don't think we've reported what the president did last night and in the early hours of this morning. Would you give us a little fill-in on that? Did he go to bed at all?
We're told, John, I was here at the White House until a little after midnight, and I know that he was in the Oval Office then, and I've been told this morning that he never went to bed. He may have tried to do some catnapping over here in the West Wing, but apparently if he got any sleep at all, it wasn't very much.
Well, that's a couple of nights then without sleep, pretty much, isn't it, Judy?
That's right. The night before, he had 2 or 3 hours of sleep off and on, and it's been a very trying last few days. And in fact, Mrs. Carter, I was speaking with someone on her staff this morning, and she said it's been a sleepless last few days for the entire First family. She said Mrs. Carter and I had only gotten a few hours of sleep. They did a little entertaining here in the residence last night. The Mondales were to spend the night for the first time in the Lincoln bedroom as the guests of the Carters. Vice President Mondale was as occupied with the hostage crisis developments as the president was, and he never went to bed. Mrs. Mondale did get to spend the night in the Lincoln bedroom, but the vice president didn't.
Yeah, Judy, the joke, of course, was that the Carters asked the Mondales to come over and try out the Lincoln bedroom to see how they might like it in 4 years. I don't know what the word is, but I'm sure that if they got there, they enjoyed every bit of that White House evening. You mentioned a minute ago that it's the crowd that's going to be in that Blue Room. It's just impossible for an American president to travel alone. I've never heard of one going anywhere by himself, and you saw that crowd that moved through the North Portico just a moment ago, press secretaries, Secret Service people. You also said that there was going to be a lot of small talk. I think that Carter and Reagan probably would exchange some information about that hostage situation. I think that it would be inevitable that the subject would come up.
Roger, I think it'll be one of those scenes where the president and the president-elect maybe stand over in a corner and talk in quiet tones about things.
You mentioned that once the swearing-in takes place up here, Jimmy Carter then slips off. He's now a private citizen, and you notice the printed program refers to him as Mr. Carter. Right. It all happens just on one page in 30 seconds. And he, of course, has Secret Service protection, but all the panoply of power has left him. But from here, he goes out to Andrews Air Force Base in suburban Maryland for the flight back to Plains. Our reporter at Andrews is Emery King. Of course, is a marble fountain that splashes during good weather. It's now filled with sand to prevent any breakage, and all that plywood will be torn down once this great ceremony is over.
The crowd here is going to be a very big one. We have about an hour, less than an hour now, before the actual ceremony of swearing in begins. And as you can see there, not only are the people filling up those folding chairs, but the people who are standing with tickets are beginning to fill in. Quite a lot. 115,000 people have been invited to stand, and John Dancy is down there with them somewhere. John?
Yes, John, I'm back in the standee area of the Capitol here. We're about 300 yards away from the platform where Ronald Reagan will actually take the oath of office. And from here, Mr. Reagan is going to appear, I'm afraid, to many of these people as a mere speck on the horizon. It's quite far away. It's in back of the seated area. And I'm here with some of the people who have come to the Capitol for this event today to stand here and watch Ronald Reagan take the oath of office. I have Ms. Audrey McBain from Alamance County in the beautiful Piedmont of North Carolina. You're telling me that you're the Republican chairman there?
Of Alamance County, right.
That must have been a lonely existence for a while.
Yes, it has been there, but it looks better.
How did Mr. Reagan do in your county?
Oh, he took the county.
You've heard that the hostages are on the end of the runway, ready to take off.
Fantastic. It's a very appropriate day. If they had to stay there all this long, then I think it's a very appropriate day for them to be returned.
How long have you been here now?
We came up Sunday.
What have you been doing in Washington in all that time?
Some sightseeing, attending some of the receptions. Last night we had a North Carolina reception, about 2,000 people there.
If you could give Mr. Reagan a piece of advice on this day, what's the one thing that you would tell him to do as president?
I suppose work on the economy. I think that was the reason he carried North Carolina, was the concern about the economy there.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Have a good time.
Thank you.
Okay, John, back to you.
Okay, John. Nice people down there. Marvin Kalb, our chief diplomatic correspondent, has been working on both the hostage story and the inaugural story, and he is now here in Washington with some foreign journalists who have some things to say. Marvin?
John, as you know, an inauguration is very much a global event as well, and I've invited two of my colleagues, Yuri Barsukov, a veteran Soviet journalist who represents Izvestia, the Soviet government newspaper, and Claude Moisy, who is the Washington bureau chief of Agence France Presse, to join us. I'd like to ask Mr. Barsukov first the reaction, East Europe, to the exit of Jimmy Carter as president.
Well, every 4 years, when there is a change of guard here in Washington, all these inaugural activities are watched very closely with a great deal of interest and attention in Moscow. And I think it's quite understandable. The U.S.-Soviet relations is a very important element in the world politics. And I think it's quite natural that Moscow would like to know what lies in store every time when there is a change of administration in Washington.
Well, we're not doing terribly well right now in Soviet-American relations. Do you think that Ronald Reagan's administration could somehow or another be a catalyst for improving the relationship?
Well, Marvin, I recall exactly 4 years ago when President Carter took office, there was a great deal of expectations and hopes in terms of Soviet-American relations. But unfortunately, at that time, all these hopes didn't materialize. It took more than 3 years until the Carter administration formulated its policy on disarmament, on SALT II talks. And then when this agreement was signed, it wasn't ratified by the Senate. So, but it doesn't mean, of course, that we are very gloomy now. Now, when President Reagan is taking office, we, the Soviet people and Moscow, of course, expect a great deal of improvement in Soviet-American relations. We hope that the future of the Soviet-American relations will be much brighter and constructive in nature.
Reported that one of the two Algerian planes at Tehran's airport, one of the two planes standing by there to bring the hostages home, one of those planes has taken off. This is according to Iranian officials that the AP is quoting. We don't know whether any of the 52 American hostages were on board that plane. It's not an official report that the plane has taken off, but the AP says Iranian officials say the plane has taken off. Back to Marvin Kalb.
One of the interesting things, there was a...
As you said, we're here with Barry Goldwater, whose conservative campaign for president in 1964 really got Ronald Reagan into presidential politics. Senator, we hear a lot of talk that this is the beginning of a new era, a realignment of parties, a new conservatism in the country. How much should we or should we not make of this?
Oh, I think we have to wait about another 2 years, see how well we do. a strange thing. This country and all governments just go around in circles. We become liberal, then conservative. That's the whole history of the world. We always wind up with conservative government because liberalism always fails, and that's the history of the world.
How conservative is Ronald Reagan? We hear some criticism from the new right now that they're not happy with his cabinet appointments. That, you know, people say, how much of a Reaganite is Reagan?
I've got many people that think I'm far to the left, so we don't pay much attention to the so-called far right. There's nothing new about the new right. They're conservative, and Ronald Reagan, well, I don't know of any place that he and I would disagree.
How much do you expect him to do in office? How much to shake up the federal system?
I think he's going to shake up the federal system a lot. I think that will probably be his biggest early accomplishment. And I don't expect wonders. I think the American people have to realize that we're in a hell of a mess, and it might take 2 years before we even begin to sense that we're changing. But I would say that if at the end of his first 4 years, the American people can realize that we are headed towards better money control, they can keep more of their own money, things aren't going sky high, then I think we'll be successful.
Let me ask you one last question. There's been some criticism of your sartorial appearance here at the inauguration, that Reagan has insisted on club coats and that you all look like conservative Republican bankers. Herbert Hoover.
Well, I wore my cowboy boots and I got my cowboy hat. I only own one pair of striped trousers in my life, and that was to get my youngest son married, and then I gave the outfit to the little theater. So I don't know what corpse this came off of, but it's on.
The American people shouldn't take it too seriously.
Don't worry about it, no.
Senator, thanks very much.
I'm a little confused. I think we're still seeing the people here at the Capitol making their way to their seats.
Now, this would be, I take it what we're seeing,
the White House
is
now.
seeing is the White House, and this is the first break from the Tea Party in the Blue Room. This is outgoing Vice President Walter Mondale, incoming Vice President George Bush. And they will be in that motorcade that'll pull out of the North grounds in just a moment. That's the White House door, and through there now will come in a moment the Reagans and the Carters.
And Judy Woodruff is outside. Judy, you there?
We are told that President-elect and Mrs. Reagan were a little bit behind schedule, a few minutes behind schedule earlier this morning, but right now I think they are right on schedule. It's a formal ceremony that they will be attending, and they want to be there on time. It's very traditional, of course, that the President-elect and his wife come to the White House and spend about 20 or 25 minutes having coffee, tea with the President before they drive together in a limousine to the Capitol. And I believe they are, well, this is more, as Roger said, this is a few more members of the group coming out, and that may be the shadows of the President and the President-elect leaving the state floor of the White House and coming out. Of course, this is it for Jimmy Carter. When he leaves today, it will be his last moment here as president. Of course, we expect that he would return at some point in the future, or several times in the future, as a former president. But this is the closing hour of his presidency.
And Judy?
And yes, John.
And I can't help interrupting on a day when we were told 10 minutes ago that the first plane bearing the hostages out of Iran may have taken off from Tehran airport. We have no confirmation of that. But that word had to have been passed, I'm sure, to the people who were in there with the President and the President-elect.
I'm sure it was, John, and it's, I hate to use the word ironic, but this hostage, yes, they are coming out now. There is Mrs. Reagan, Mrs. Carter,
and
coming out together.
Rhodes
they will ride in the second car following the President and the President-elect. Mrs. Reagan, of course, in red. Mrs. Carter in a white coat. And they seem to be pausing there before they get in the car.
Well, you know, with all those people in that motorcade, it takes a few minutes to get them arranged and seated, and the cars all arranged. There they are now.
It does, and yes, here they are, the president-elect and the president coming down the stairs a few feet away from each other. It looks like they're talking to reporters. I'm not sure if we can hear what was just said, but my colleague John Palmer is over there, and perhaps he'll come running over in a minute and tell us if there's any news about the hostages. What I was going to say a minute ago is that it is ironic that the hostage issue, which helped to defeat Jimmy Carter, is haunting him right up until the last moments of his presidency. The Iranian officials have been able to deny him even the opportunity to announce to the American people, to announce as president that they have been released. That announcement will have to come from someone else. They're
Judy,
in the car, and
it looks like the motorcade is in place, and there they roll. That's the lead car with the Carters and the Reagans.
And they're dead on time, 11:05 Washington time, when that first car started to move.
Never happened before in Washington, John.
Well, I wonder if this will not run on time today. The presidential seal there on the limousine.
This is a notoriously late town for scheduled events. It really is, particularly when it snows.
we're seeing there's a good bit of activity on the White House lawn now as some of the reporters, photographers are racing to get into the press vehicles, the vans and the station wagons that will follow the limousines as they make their way toward the Capitol.
It's an enormous limousine, larger than most, more heavily armored than all, big enough to sit knee to knee and face to face. Every car, of course, has a Secret Service driver and an agent, and the zoo truck, which contains the press pool and the still photographers and the newsreels, are right behind, known affectionately as the zoo truck.
Just give the news, please. It takes about 10 minutes for the motorcade, proceeding slowly, to make its way from the White House. There they are now out in Pennsylvania Avenue, from the White House to the Capitol. And that's the car that the new president will ride back to the White House in.
The scene you're not seeing here on the White House grounds is some members of the Reagan staff-to-be trickling onto the grounds and making their way into the West Wing. A few of them are already going to be finding their offices and getting in place because as of 12 o'clock, it's business for them. And some of them are already here. They are mingling with some members of the outgoing Carter staff. But of course, that's a scene we don't see. We will keep our eye on the motorcade.
It's always a poignant moment, Judy, when the people who have worked so hard for one president, and they really do work terribly hard in the White House, see the new, fresh, untested people coming in full of hope and ambition for the next 4 years, and the ones going out know really how difficult it is to move things in this government.
They do, John, and I've been talking to several of the people I've come to know on the Carter staff over the last few days about this transition period, and most of them complain that 2.5 months is really more than enough time to do what needs to be done to transfer one administration, the power, to the next administration. It's been sad from the day the president lost, November 4th, until today, January the 20th. Every day there's been a new reminder of the fact that they're on their way out. And I was speaking with someone this morning who said in sort of a perverse way, the fact that they are so preoccupied with the hostage crisis over the last few days has helped them take their minds off of having to leave.
Still, there's going to be an awful letdown for a lot of those people who have been putting in those 18-hour days, 5, 6, 7 days a week for the last 4 years. Something that we don't pay enough attention to, it seems to me. There in the back of your picture is the U.S. Treasury.
That's the building, John, that blocks the clear view that Congress has of the White House and the President has of the Capitol. And it is said that that building was put there because Andrew Jackson got tired of the argument about where they were going to build the Treasury. So he walked out one day with his cane and jabbed his cane in the ground and said, "By God, build it here." So there it is, blocking our view.
Andrea Mitchell is down in that crowd somewhere. Andrea, can you hear us?
I can hear you, and we can now see the presidential limousine, the limousine coming up Pennsylvania Avenue. People first beginning to see it and beginning to wave. People in this crowd, several hundred people along the parade route. Not too many people in the bleachers in the reserve seat stands, but lots of people along what is now Western Plaza. Right now, passing us, we can see the limousine, see people waving from inside the limousine with, of course, the presidential flag and the United States flag, and the Secret Service agents alongside the convertibles following. Then the second limousine, and of course all of the escort cars. Passing us now with people here who've been waiting, and it did get a little bit chillier in the past hour or so. It has now dropped about 10 degrees or so, and the wind has picked up. The sun has gone behind a cloud, but people are well bundled and catching their first glimpse of the president and the president-elect as they head towards the Capitol, of course, for the swearing-in ceremonies.
Andrea, that limousine that the Reagans and the Carters are in looks so long that it probably is hinged in the middle to make those turns. Has it come by you yet?
It has come by us, and it looked as though it would have had to be hinged to make that turn along 15th Street to go towards this side of Pennsylvania Avenue. But it has passed us. It is now heading up towards the Capitol.
And what's that white delivery truck in the front?
That's a photo truck.
Is it?
That is
Probably
a photo truck.
groceries for the luncheon.
A photo truck, presumably without the groceries, with lots of cameras. And, of course, following cameras and agents behind the ambulance that, of course, would follow in any presidential motorcade.
You know, they take a part of the appropriation that is given by the federal government to the district government of over $1 million is for the removal of the street lights that run down the middle of Pennsylvania Avenue. They unscrew those and cap off the wires and take them out so that that flying wedge of police cars can sweep down the broad width of the avenue without having to dodge warning lights and pedestrian stop-and-go lights.
Roger, as a matter of fact, when we were here on Friday and Saturday, those streetlights were still up, and the people who were in charge of this part of the parade route were complaining that those lights hadn't come down yet, and as you can tell, they have already come down. They did do everything in time.
Well, there's the 900-foot-long limousine that's on its way to Capitol Hill. It looks like it's more than halfway there now. It is approaching what appears to be about 7th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue.
One other thing, Roger, is that, as you know, when John Kennedy came through on his parade going towards the White House and passed along this way, Western Plaza, he said that it didn't look as though it were the route of presidents. Pennsylvania Avenue has been, let's face it, sort of a slum, parts of it, run down, dilapidated. It's been fixed up. The Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation has just finished this plaza. They finished the finishing touches, the plaza and the fountain over this weekend.
You know, Andrea, Pennsylvania Avenue is notorious over the years. It used to be a train station used to be down there. There was a red light district there, an old swamp, Tiber Creek, and a canal ran through it. It's all been renovated and made to be a grand avenue.
I'd like just to break in here, Andrea and Roger, and say that we have more on the hostages. The Pars news agency, the official news agency in Iran, plus an NBC news source in Tehran, both tell us that the planes with the hostages aboard will be airborne in what I would calculate to be about 15 to 20 minutes. At 11 o'clock this morning, Eastern Standard Time, Pars said that those planes would be in the air within a half an hour. Well, it's now 11:15. What this means is unprecedented drama. The last great act of the Carter administration may be taking place 8,000 miles away, 15 minutes before Mr. Carter leaves office. So to repeat, as our latest word is that the hostages are at the airport, that the planes are about to leave, but that they may not yet have left. And Mr. Carter has 45 minutes to go under the Constitution of the United States.
I know you told me just to give the news, but my suspicion is that the Iranian government is calculating the hostage departure time exactly with the inaugural ceremony.
It very well may be, Roger. In this situation, I suspend any disbelief. It's 7:45 in the evening over there now in Tehran. We do know that it's a country at war. They have a blackout, but they've turned the runway lights on at Mehrabad Airport. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I would expect that we would get the news within the next half hour that the 52 American hostages are airborne on their way to freedom as the president and the president-elect are preparing for a transfer of constitutional power here in Washington. This one will go into the history books.
Just unbelievable, just unbelievable. This picture here is of the motorcade coming up Capitol Hill. It used to be called Jenkins Hill around here before they built the Capitol. It dominates the eastern edge of the city. It's elevation above sea level, I think, of 400 feet, something like that. But it's a prominent position, and this is the lead car, the Reagan-Carter car. And this is the crowd you see watching the approach. It will come up to the top of the hill, turn right, turn to the south, into Capitol Plaza on the east front. 4 years ago, of course, the east front was filled with spectators anticipating the Carter swearing in. There's the turn into the Capitol.
And now, you'll recall that's where the old inaugurals used to be held, along that front. And today it's going back to being a parking lot,
That's
which
right.
it usually is.
The entrance is so-called the law library entrance. Is where they will come out of their cars. It's called that because the Supreme Court used to meet in the Capitol building, and that's where the justices came in, through the law library door. And our reporter there waiting for the arrival is Bob Kerr, isn't it? Bob?
That's right, Roger. We've already seen some of Mr. Reagan's cabinet appointees come on in. The Supreme Court Justice Chief Berger has come in, and some other Supreme Court members. Frank Sinatra has pulled up here just a little while ago, and Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. and his wife, Robert Stack, the actor, and his wife. The Reagan and Bush families came in at a doorway not far from here a little while ago. Billy Graham came in this entrance a little while ago, as did Henry Kissinger, but the most important motorcade of the day, the principals of the day, is just about to arrive here right now.
Those are not joggers, Bob.
That's right.
They're Secret Service men.
That's right, Roger. This is the first car of this motorcade, and it contains President Carter, President-elect Reagan, Senators Mark Hatfield and Claiborne Pell. Just about everybody who comes in here will have an escort from the Joint Congressional Committee. There's the president now, and President-elect Reagan getting out of opposite sides of the same car. To a bit of applause here.
Mark Hatfield.
Tip O'Neill, Speaker of the House in that group. And they are going on into the law library door right now.
Bob, they're inside now. I'm not sure you can see through the dark door, but they have come inside to what's normally a little tourist stand there. It's where the Capitol Historical Society sells its souvenirs, a gift shop, as it were. And they are going into what is known as EF 100, a room, EF standing for East Front, into EF 100, where they will wait. That is, Mr. Reagan will wait.
That's right, because the president goes to another holding room.
Yeah, that's right.
And there are holding rooms all over this side of the Capitol where people wait until they're called. But now they are separated. The president and the president-elect, having had their ride up Pennsylvania Avenue in the same car will not meet again until one of them watches the other take the oath.
Holding room is a polite phrase for hideaway. They're called holding rooms in the official program, but really they're hideaways, and they are little rooms tucked off in the various corridors of the Capitol where senior senators can go and make private phone calls and take naps if they want to.
I thought it was interesting in the pictures that we just saw that Ronald Reagan rode in the jump seat of that limousine up to the Capitol. When he rides down to the White House again, he'll be able to sit in the back. We'll be back with more coverage of the inaugural after this.
What do you think EIK means?
Eat-in kitchen?
Oh, look, here's one. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, economical gas heat.
Hey, circle that one.
You know,
when people look for a home today, they look for efficiency. Gas heats more homes efficiently than any other energy system. It heats water, cooks meals, and dries clothes efficiently. And new energy-saving gas appliances use less fuel than ever. Gas. The future belongs to the efficient.
Okay, ladies, let's see your beautiful chicken and rice dishes. Divine. Good.
Sorry, Mrs. Lamont, my rice is sticky.
Overcooked.
My rice is kind of drippy.
Undercooked. Ladies, to make sure your rice turns out right every time, use minute rice. It's foolproof. Can't overcook or undercook because it's never boiled. Minute rice comes out perfect every time.
Mrs. Lamont, how about lunch?
Use foolproof minute rice.
The perfect rice every time.
Live from Washington, D.C., NBC News covers the inauguration of Ronald Reagan. Today's coverage is brought to you in part by the General Foods family of fine products, pleasing you and your family for over 50 years. American Gas, your gas company, providing efficient gas energy for today and tomorrow. And Polaroid, makers of the revolutionary new Time Zero Supercolor, the world's fastest developing color film. Now, reporting from the United States Capitol, here are NBC News correspondents Roger Mudd and John Chancellor.
Good morning once again from the West Front. Everybody is in place on this inaugural platform. The honored guests, the families of the Reagans and the Bushes are all here. Ronald Reagan's California friends, the so-called Millionaire Kitchen Cabinet are all there. The Senate is here, the House, the Diplomatic Corps, the governors, many of them wearing the prescribed dress of a stroller coat, the club coat, the gray, pearl gray waistcoat and the striped necktie. And in about 10 minutes, President-elect Reagan and President Carter will be seen coming out on the West Front. John?
There's Frank Sinatra, one of the President-elect's friends who has been arranging the entertainment for the inaugural, and there you see more of the collection of diplomats, VIPs, governors, congressmen, and senators all assembled here. That's the high rent district. You can see at the bottom of your screen the Chief Justice and members of the Supreme Court taking their place. The Chief Justice will, as tradition calls, administer the oath to Ronald Reagan, and Associate Justice Potter Stewart will administer the oath to the Vice President George Bush. And there you can see members of the court coming in now with their escorts. They have a special section reserved for them.
That's Justice Lewis Powell and
also one VIP who is not up there on the stand today, as far as I can tell, is the Reverend Jerry Falwell, who became quite famous during the campaign because of his Moral Majority organization. Some thought at one point he might be giving the invocation here today. He's not. He's in the crowd with Carol Simpson. Carol?
Thank you. The Reverend Falwell is one of the 25,000 people that have one of the nice coveted seats right here in front of the inaugural stand. Reverend Falwell, what does this day mean to you?
I think this is a day with a real supernatural meaning. The hostages, potential release, a new president, a new administration. There's just a sense of real optimism in the country that I haven't sensed in many years. I'm grateful to God for what is happening here today.
This is your first inaugural, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And could you tell us what your feeling is as you're part of all of this hoopla?
I don't think the president-elect could be more excited than I am, my wife and 3 children who are here. We believe that that America is still the greatest nation on earth. And we owe a lot of credit to President Carter, particularly in the hostage negotiations. And I take my hat off to him, and I thank God for him. I think President Reagan's saber rattling had little to do with the very timely release. And we just, with all Americans, rejoice and thank God and pray that perhaps God may give to this country a new beginning.
All right. Thank you very much, the Reverend Jerry Falwell, President of the Moral Majority. Now back to the anchor booth.
Of course, the invocation and the convocation will be pronounced not by Jerry Falwell today, but by the Reverend Don Mumaw, who is listed in our program information guide as an All-American linebacker from UCLA, who is the Presbyterian minister, I think, in Bel Air out in California, where the Reagan family goes to church. While he's here in Washington, he will attend the National Presbyterian Church, which is about a 9-iron shot from the NBC offices out in Northwest Washington. We'll be back covering the appearance of the Reagans and the Carters here in the West Front in just a moment.
Well, we're looking at our the crowd behind us here, which is almost fully assembled. In a moment or two, the president will be leaving the holding room, and the president-elect will be leaving his to come up here and join these people. Now, I believe that's the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm not absolutely certain. I can't see General Jones, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. It's a mixed day for him, however, because Carter has indicated he might not want to keep General Jones as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And that just may be General Jones on the left of your picture. It's hard for me to see here.
That is, nobody has that much scrambled eggs on their caps than the Joint Chiefs, John.
And you can see various other, there's Bob Dole, who is now a very important man in the U.S. Senate. People will have to deal and treat with him as they have not dealt and treated with him before. And he's a very powerful figure in the new Congress. Senator Weicker and Senator Moynihan, I believe. And Senator Moynihan is not wearing one of those Irish wool hats. He's very formally decked out. His trademark is one of those Irish tweed caps or hats.
That's a major concession on his part. That's also on his right is John Warner of Virginia, Lowell Weicker, John Tower with the little velvet collar, and he stands just behind Ted Stevens, who's the majority whip in the U.S. Senate.
And we're going to break away momentarily here for more on the hostages from Robert Abernathy.
John, every sign indicates that the 52 American hostages in Iran are expected to take off any minute, possibly are already now taking off. Another unofficial report, I repeat, unofficial, says the American hostages have taken off. The Associated Press quotes a policeman at Tehran airport to that effect, but this is not confirmed by the Department of State here yet or by any other source. The Iranian news agency, Pars, said a few minutes ago that the hostages would be taking off by 11:30 Eastern Time. That's almost now, so we're expecting official word and more unofficial confirmation any time that this is now happening. The chief Iranian negotiator in all this did go to the airport. Hostages are reported to have been seen there, apparently for some sort of farewell ceremony. Back to the Capitol.
And now we have just seen members of the families. Mrs. Bush came out a few minutes ago and was seated. That's the doorway through which the president-elect will appear. We have not yet seen Mrs. Carter come out that door or Mrs. Reagan, but there is some applause now, and we may see them, and there, Mrs. Carter and Mrs. Reagan on schedule. Followed by the wives of members of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies. There's an enormous amount of protocol up here today.
Mrs. Reagan in that bright red and that hat is a little reminiscent, if I may say so, of Jackie Kennedy's pillbox from 20 years ago.
It is reminiscent of that.
There's Ron Reagan, the tall, applauding young man, the son of the incoming president, Mrs. Carter and Mrs. Mondale. And so from now on, there will be just one important arrival after another. There is Ron Reagan and his wife, Doria. in the dark red, Mrs. Bush in the really luminescent blue, hugging Antoinette Hatfield. Tell me about Mrs. Bush.
Mrs. Bush fell at getting onto one of those endless platforms these people have to get on and off, and I'm told she cut both of her legs fairly badly, but she looks fine now. There's Mrs. Reagan and her son, Ron. Edwin Meese III, the counselor to the president, is, well, he's now just momentarily obscured. He's a face to watch in this. I see Senator Paul Laxalt of Nevada back there. He's another very, very close Reagan friend who will be important to keep an eye on during this administration.
And I take it the bespectacled gentleman just behind Mrs. Reagan is her brother Richard Davis of Philadelphia, or half-brother, I guess. And in the little, I guess, soft cloche hat, purple hat, is Maureen Reagan.
On the left of the picture
right
there.
behind Mrs. Bush.
Yeah, that's right. Well, while they're waiting, we'll be back with more coverage after... No, sorry.
Leaning over is Patty Reagan, talking to her mother.
They had a kind of tearful ceremony when the Reagans left Pacific Palisades for the last time with the house up for sale, and Patty was there. You'll all recall the pictures we saw there of that.
So we're about, I think, within a minute or two, it seems to me, of the arrival. I've got on my schedule 11:30 a.m. presidential party. There they are.
There they are, the outgoing administration. President Carter, Vice President Mondale, accompanied by Speaker Thomas P. O'Neill.
That's not Walter Matthau. That's a Secret Service agent right behind him, and that was Jimmy Carter's personal agent during the last 4 years. Don't those blue and red coats stand out?
They certainly do. It's all, if they're going to schedule, we have about a minute before we see the president-elect. See, the president is still in the Capitol itself.
He was up on the second floor. Mr. Reagan was on the first floor. And there is the incoming president with Mark Hatfield, John Rhodes. That's a little picture inside that room we talked about, EF 100. They finally got a pool camera in there, and they're watching themselves, and we're watching them watching themselves. Which is
always
sounds vaguely illegal, doesn't it, John?
Well, it happens at conventions every 4 years where you see the winner and his family watching the proceedings on television, although you know that it's a pool picture and they're really watching themselves, which I've always thought accounted for the self-satisfied looks on their faces. In any case, this is, I'm sure, true small talk, true banter.
Look in Reagan's hand, in Mr. Reagan's hand are the 5x8 cards that they have told us his speech will be on.
Yeah, they're called half sheets. What they do is they take sheets the size of regular typing paper and they cut them in half. And that's what he likes to speak from. And I'm told that I think those are the half sheets in his hand there now, although they look like filing cards. The speech is not going to be a very long speech. He wrote it mainly himself. His speechwriter, Ken Kachigian, who worked for Nixon for a while, said he was simply the coordinator of the speech. So what you will hear this morning are mainly words written by Ronald Reagan on a long yellow pad. Now the president coming out of the Capitol to the Hail to the Chief being played.
Those three men are from the inaugural committee. They're Bill Cochran, Mello Fish, and Charles Mallon, leading now Mr. Carter and Mr. Mondale. So Jimmy Carter has approximately 27 minutes left. Is that right? 27 minutes? 25? High noon.
And so now it's time for Mr. Reagan to be escorted up to this platform. The sky is slightly overcast. There's no bright sun, but it's a very pleasant day, and this will go down as one of the warmest weather inaugurals in history. Probably well over 50 by now in Washington.
And it comes at the end of a very long stretch of cold weather that Washington has had. Froze the Potomac River. All the canals around here were tightly shut. Lots of ice skaters. Now everybody's turned, waiting obviously for the announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, they'll say.
And we ought to say that once this ceremony begins, the official or formal part of it, there'll be welcoming remarks by Senator Mark Hatfield, who is chairman of the inaugural committee on Capitol Hill. There will be the invocation. I believe the Reverend Don Mumaw of the Bel Air Presbyterian Church will do that. Then Justice Potter Stewart will deliver the oath to the Vice President. And at noon, the oath of office will be administered to the new president. These are the elements of what we are about to see in the next 23 minutes. Well, George Bush has some momentum now, I would say, Roger.
That's a great memory. I've forgotten that. I remember that phrase the morning after the Iowa victory. It's Big Mo, he called it.
Big Mo. Well, you know, George Bush, a Yale man, captain of the football team there, Skull and Bones, a war hero, Phi Beta Kappa, director of Central Intelligence, American ambassador at the UN, American ambassador in Peking, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, a member of Congress. There is hardly anything that George Herbert Walker Bush has not done. He is now, the only thing I suppose is the U.S. Senate or President.
John, a bulletin, a flash, one of the rare flashes in the last 25 years from United Press International. It says simply, hostages freed. The time, 11:35 Eastern Standard Time, 11:35.
Well, they couldn't have spun it in more closely. We'll be hearing more, and we will be bringing you these bulletins as we get them. That was the first, the flash on the UPI.
There's a big wink from incoming. Tip of the finger to somebody he spotted in the crowd. Just to bring you up to date, reading from right to left in that last picture, Mrs. Reagan, Mrs. Bush, Mrs. Hatfield. They're over on the far side. Then here comes President-elect Reagan, followed by Hatfield and Rhodes. And they are passing now through the so-called crypt, the dark underroom beneath the rotunda.
You know, the crypt is interesting. Washington is divided into northwest and southeast and southwest and all that. And that's where those boundaries intersect, in the crypt, in the Capitol.
That center stone there splits us in 4 quadrants.
That's right.
He is the first actor ever elected president, and I know he's a professional at that, but I still would imagine that he's got some nerves, doesn't he?
He's also the first divorced man to be elected president. Breaking a lot of new ground here today, right, Roger.
And the oldest man ever to be sworn in. He'll be 70 in, I think, 2 weeks, not
February 6th.
Not the oldest president.
Eisenhower was the oldest president because Eisenhower was 70 years and 98 days old when he left office. And Reagan will not break that record until the month of May, but that's coming up pretty fast. He'll soon be the oldest, and he is the oldest to take this oath.
That shot is of the west front door, through which Mr. Reagan will appear in a minute. Just above them, of course, is some press, some cameras, military.
Roger, I know that a lot of people think JFK was the youngest ever inaugurated. It actually was Theodore Roosevelt, who was 42 years old, a year younger than Kennedy.
President-elect of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Mark Hatfield, Chairman of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, will present the program.
Welcome to the historic first inauguration under the panoply of the West Front of our nation's capital. The 40th President of the United States takes his oath of office in a day when a tide of new hope is rising throughout our land. As an affirmation of this new hope, let us all join Michael Ryan of the United States Marines in singing a verse of America the Beautiful. Will you all join and reach out and grasp the hand of your neighbor, and let this be a symbol of our unity. Would you come forward?
For spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesties, above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining Oh, beautiful, for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, God mend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law.
Please be seated. This new hope is not promoted in lyricism, but is tough and realistic hope, which is the instinct of the soul, the energizer of the mind. For our invocation today, I present President-elect and Mrs. Reagan's pastor, the Reverend Don Mumma of the Bel Air Presbyterian Church in Los Angeles. Will you please stand?
Wherever you might be, here and in the United States and around the world, please bow with me in this moment of solemn dedication and prayer. Gracious God our Father, We need you today, maybe as never before. We have not lived up to our personal or national potential. We have seen our world from our own selfish, parochial point of view. We have lived as though everything depended upon us. We confess our sin and seek your forgiveness. In this historic moment, we would pray for our President-elect, Ronald Reagan. May he see himself as one who has been called by you to lead this country. May he take very seriously his accountability to you and do all he can to walk in your truth, run with patience the race that is set before him, and stand mature and wholly devoted to doing your will. Grant him a steady peace, a brave and compassionate heart, a single desire to always be quick to give you all the praise and the honor and glory. Help and encourage Mrs. Reagan and the children in these days. Teach them, O God, to understand that with responsibility comes sacrifice, and with leadership comes loneliness. May they all find their companionship in you, O God. We also pray for Vice President-elect George Bush, the cabinet, and all others who are in positions of leadership in this new administration. May they measure well the shortness of time and the length of eternity. May they see all people and things and nations from your point of view. We thank you, O God, for this moment of commitment. Give to all of us as a nation enough hard times to keep us humble and humane, enough tasks beyond our own abilities to keep us ever dependent upon you, enough joys and accomplishments to keep us pressing on and gloriously happy as we serve you together. We thank you, O God, for the release of the hostages, and for all of those who have made this moment possible. And so in this moment of new beginnings, our hearts beat with a cadence of pride in our country and hope in its future. Help us to stand proudly as American citizens and face every challenge with a confidence born of your spirit and humbly touched by your love and grace. So to this end we commit ourselves, and to this end we pray. In the name of the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, even Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
Please be seated. My fellow citizens, will you please join me at this time in wishing good health and happiness to President and Mrs. Carter and to Vice President and Mrs. Mondale. I now present the Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, the Honorable Potter Stewart, who will administer the oath of office to the Vice President-elect.
You put your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand, and repeat after me. I, George Herbert Walker Bush.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
that I will well and faithfully discharge
will well and faithfully discharge
the duties of the office
on
which I am about to enter. So help you God.
So help me God.
God bless you, George. God bless you both. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The United States Marine Band will now play our national hymn, God of Our Fathers. My fellow citizens, I now present the Chief Justice of the United States, the Honorable Warren Burger, who will administer the oath of office to the President-elect.
Governor, are you prepared to take the constitutional oath?
I am.
If you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand and repeat after me, I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability,
And will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Now, I congratulate you, sir. President.
That is the 21-gun salute, which traditionally follows an inaugural.
Congratulations to you. Congratulations to you. I have to say, Mr. Hurley.
My fellow countrymen, the President of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Hatfield, Mr. Chief Justice, Mr. President, Vice President Bush, Vice President Mondale, Senator Baker, Speaker O'Neill, Reverend Mumaw, and my fellow citizens. To a few of us here today, this is a solemn and most momentous occasion. And yet in the history of our nation, it is a commonplace occurrence. The orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution routinely takes place as it has for almost 2 centuries, and few of us stop to think how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle. Mr. President, I want our fellow citizens to know how much you did to carry on this tradition. By your gracious cooperation in the transition process, you have shown a watching world that we are a united people, pledged to maintaining a political system which guarantees individual liberty to a greater degree than any other. And I thank you and your people for all your help in maintaining the continuity which is the bulwark of our republic. The business of our nation goes forward. These United States are confronted with an economic affliction of great proportions. We suffer from the longest and one of the worst sustained inflations in our national history. It distorts our economic decisions, penalizes thrift, and crushes the struggling young and the fixed-income elderly alike. It threatens to shatter the lives of millions of our people. Idle industries have cast workers into unemployment, human misery, and personal indignity. Those who do work are denied a fair return for their labor by a tax system which penalizes successful achievement and keeps us from maintaining full productivity. But great as our tax burden is, it has not kept pace with public spending. For decades, we have piled deficit upon deficit, mortgaging our future and our children's future for the temporary convenience of the present. To continue this long trend is to guarantee tremendous social, cultural, political, and economic upheavals. You and I, as individuals, can, by borrowing, live beyond our means, but for only a limited period of time. Why then should we think that collectively, as a nation, we're not bound by that same limitation? We must act today in order to preserve tomorrow. And let there be no misunderstanding. We're going to begin to act beginning today. The economic ills we suffer have come upon us over several decades. They will not go away in days, weeks, or months, but they will go away. They will go away because we, as Americans, have the capacity now, as we've had in the past, to do whatever needs to be done to preserve this last and greatest bastion of freedom. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. From time to time, we've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule, that government by an elite group is superior to government for, by, and of the people. Well, if no one among us is capable of governing himself, then who among us has the capacity to govern someone else? All of us together, in and out of government, must bear the burden. The solutions we seek must be equitable, with no one group singled out to pay a higher price. We hear much of special interest groups. Well, our concern must be for a special interest group that has been too long neglected. It knows no sectional boundaries or ethnic and racial divisions, and it crosses political party lines. It is made up of men and women who raise our food, patrol our streets, man our mines and factories, teach our children, keep our homes, and heal us when we're sick. Professionals, industrialists, shopkeepers, clerks, cabbies, and truck drivers. They are, in short, we the people. This breed called Americans. Well, this administration's objective will be a healthy, vigorous, growing economy that provides equal opportunities for all Americans with no barriers born of bigotry or discrimination. Putting America back to work means putting all Americans back to work. Ending inflation means freeing all Americans from the terror of runaway living costs. All must share in the productive work of this new beginning, and all must share in the bounty of a revived economy. With the idealism and fair play which are the core of our system and our strength, we can have a strong and prosperous America at peace with itself and the world. So as we begin, let us take inventory. We are a nation that has a government, not the other way around. And this makes us special among the nations of the earth. Our government has no power except that granted it by the people. It is time to check and reverse the growth of government which shows signs of having grown beyond the consent of the governed. It is my intention to curb the size and influence of the federal establishment and to demand recognition of the distinction between the powers granted to the federal government and those reserved to the states or to the people. All of us need to be reminded that the federal government did not create the states. The states created the federal government. Now, so there will be no misunderstanding, it's not my intention to do away with government. It is rather to make it work with us, not over us, to stand by our side, not ride on our back. Government can and must provide opportunity, not smother it. Foster productivity, not stifle it. If we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much, prospered as no other people on earth, it was because here in this land we unleashed the energy and individual genius of man to a greater extent than has ever been done before. Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth. The price for this freedom at times has been high, but we have never been unwilling to pay that price. It is no coincidence that our present troubles parallel and are proportionate to the intervention and intrusion in our lives that result from unnecessary and excessive growth of government. It is time for us to realize that we're too great a nation to limit ourselves to small dreams. We're not, as some would have us believe, doomed to an inevitable decline. I do not believe in a fate that will fall on us no matter what we do. I do believe in a fate that will fall on us if we do nothing. So with all the creative energy at our command, let us begin an era of national renewal. Let us renew our determination, our courage, and our strength. And let us renew our faith and our hope. We have every right to dream heroic dreams. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. You can see heroes every day going in and out of factory gates. Others, a handful in number, produce enough food to feed all of us and then the world beyond. You meet heroes across a counter, and they're on both sides of that counter. There are entrepreneurs with faith in themselves and faith in an idea who create new jobs, new wealth, and opportunity. They're individuals and families who take taxes, support the government, and whose voluntary gifts support church, charity, culture, art, and education. Their patriotism is quiet but deep. Their values sustain our national life. Now, I have used the words they and their in speaking of these heroes. I could say you and your, because I'm addressing the heroes of whom I speak, you, the citizens of this blessed land. Your dreams, your hopes, your goals are going to be the dreams, the hopes, and the goals of this administration, so help me God. We shall reflect the compassion that is so much a part of your makeup. How can we love our country and not love our countrymen? And loving them, reach out a hand when they fall, heal them when they're sick, and provide opportunity to make them self-sufficient so they will be equal in fact and not just in theory. Can we solve the problems confronting us? Well, the answer is an unequivocal and emphatic yes. To paraphrase Winston Churchill, I did not take the oath I've just taken with the intention of presiding over the dissolution of the world's strongest economy. In the days ahead, I will propose removing the roadblocks that have slowed our economy and reduced productivity. Steps will be taken aimed at restoring the balance between the various levels of government. Progress may be slow, measured in inches and feet, not miles, but we will progress. It is time to reawaken this industrial giant, to get government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. And these will be our first priorities, and on these principles there will be no compromise. On the eve of our struggle for independence, a man who might have been one of the greatest among the founding fathers, Dr. Joseph Warren, President of the Massachusetts Congress, said to his fellow Americans, "Our country is in danger, but not to be despaired of. On you depend the fortunes of America. You are to decide the important question upon which rests the happiness and the liberty of millions yet unborn. Act worthy of yourselves." Well, I believe we, the Americans of today, are ready to act worthy of ourselves, ready to do what must be done to ensure happiness and liberty for ourselves, our children, and our children's children. And as we renew ourselves here in our own land, we will be seen as having greater strength throughout the world. We will again be the exemplar of freedom and a beacon of hope for those who do not now have freedom. To those neighbors and allies who share our freedom, we will strengthen our historic ties and assure them of our support and firm commitment. We will match loyalty with loyalty. We will strive for mutually beneficial relations. We will not use our friendship to impose on their sovereignty, for our own sovereignty is not for sale. As for the enemies of freedom, those who are potential adversaries, they will be reminded that peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. We will negotiate for it, sacrifice for it. We will not surrender for it now or ever. Our forbearance should never be misunderstood. Our reluctance for conflict should not be misjudged as a failure of will. When action is required to preserve our national security, we will act. We will maintain sufficient strength to prevail if need be, knowing that if we do so, we have the best chance of never having to use that strength. Above all, we must realize that no arsenal or no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. It is a weapon that we as Americans do have. Let that be understood by those who practice terrorism and prey upon their neighbors. I'm told that tens of thousands of prayer meetings are being held on this day. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free. It would be fitting and good, I think, if on each inaugural day in future years, it should be declared a day of prayer. This is the first time in our history that this ceremony has been held, as you've been told, on this west front of the Capitol. Standing here, one faces a magnificent vista opening up on this city's special beauty and history. At the end of this open mall are those shrines to the giants on whose shoulders we stand. Directly in front of me, the monument to a monumental man, George Washington, father of our country. A man of humility who came to greatness reluctantly. He led America out of revolutionary victory into infant nationhood. Off to one side, the stately memorial to Thomas Jefferson, The Declaration of Independence flames with his eloquence. And then beyond the reflecting pool, the dignified columns of the Lincoln Memorial. Whoever would understand in his heart the meaning of America will find it in the life of Abraham Lincoln. Beyond those monuments to heroism is the Potomac River, and on the far shore, the sloping hills of Arlington National Cemetery with its row upon row of simple white markers bearing crosses or stars of David. They add up to only a tiny fraction of the price that has been paid for our freedom. Each one of those markers is a monument to the kind of hero I spoke of earlier. Their lives ended in places called Belleau Wood, the Argonne, Omaha Beach, Salerno, and halfway around the world on Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Pork Chop Hill, the Chosin Reservoir, and in 100 rice paddies and jungles of a place called Vietnam. Under one such marker lies a young man, Martin Treptow, who left his job in a small-town barber shop in 1917 to go to France with the famed Rainbow Division. There on the Western Front, he was killed trying to carry a message between battalions under heavy artillery fire. We're told that on his body was found a diary. On the flyleaf, under the heading, My Pledge, he had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore, I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure. I will fight cheerfully and do my utmost as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone. The crisis we're facing today does not require of us the kind of sacrifice that Martin Treptow and so many thousands of others were called upon to make. It does require, however, our best effort and our willingness to believe in ourselves and to believe in our capacity to perform great deeds, to believe that together, with God's help, we can and will resolve the problems which now confront us. And after all, why shouldn't we believe that? We are Americans. God bless you and thank you. Thank you very much.
Will you remain standing, please? The Joint Congressional Committee on the Inauguration and all the members of the United States Congress are honored that you have come here for this great occasion today. And as we close now with the benediction offered by Reverend Mumaw, that will be followed by the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner by Mrs. Juanita Booker.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you peace, both now and forevermore. Amen.
Oh, what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, oh, the ramparts we watched, it was so gallantly streaming in the rugged red blaze, the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that tower flags was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Oh, the land and all the free, and the home of the brave.
Will you greet once more our President and Mrs. Reagan?
Thank you very much.
And there, Senator Hatfield congratulating the President and the First Lady. Mr. Jimmy Carter has left the platform, as far as we can tell. He did just a moment ago, which is all part of the ceremony here. It's Ronald Reagan's day now.
Just before the President relinquished the oath of office, a reporter asked him, had the hostages left Tehran, and his last quoted word was, "Not yet." So we're still in the midst of what appear to be conflicting reports. Wire services say yes. The President of the United States, who presumably had up-to-the-minute information, says not yet. It was when Mr. Reagan was waving at the crowd, he'd been president less than a minute and a half, that Jimmy Carter turned with Walter Mondale, and they went out those steps ahead of the new president.
Now, they're all going into various things. The President Reagan, will give a luncheon, or it will be given for him here at the Capitol. And he will be here having lunch. There'll be a little reception. He's got actually some presidential work to do. He's got some commissions to sign, a small 2 or 3 minute ceremony.
Really not much work.
No, not much work, you're right.
He's not going to get, you know, in any kind of crash session right now. What he does, he goes down through the rotunda and then down to the Senate Appropriations hearing room, for a reception. There'll be sherry and coffee and one thing and another, and they make a brief stop there, and then after that they go up to the Senate level to the room that reporters use to talk to senators. It's off the Senate floor, and it's where various presidents, including Woodrow Wilson, used to come to sign documents. And in that room, the president will sign the actual instrument transmitting the nominees, his cabinet people, so that this afternoon between, I think, 4 and 6, the Senate can go ahead and confirm those that are ready.
Not all are ready. They'll confirm several this afternoon, and several more will be confirmed later this week, with Mr. Donovan, the Secretary of Labor designate, still kind of a question mark. We're not certain about that.
Well, you'd have to say, John, that the use of the West Front was an artistic success, an acoustical success, a visionary success. Everybody had almost unencumbered view of the proceedings. Certainly it was a grand sweep for the new president to look out. He was obviously moved by what he saw.
I think unless there's grave danger from falling masonry, and that's always true on this end of the Capitol, that all of our inaugurals will be here where it happened today from now on. It is a perfect place for it. He had a nice day. On the speech, which lasted about 20 minutes, in which President Reagan, sorry about that's the first of many, which President Reagan wrote on the airplane largely, going back and forth to California, it will not go down as one of the great inspiring and visionary speeches made. It will also go down as one of the shorter speeches made, about 20 minutes. My sense of it, Roger, was that aside from a couple of paragraphs, it was a statement of basic Reagan philosophy, much of which he had articulated during the national campaign. He had a line in there saying, in this present crisis, government is not the solution, it is the problem, which we all have heard him say on the stump a dozen, 2 dozen, 5 dozen times. The one I think that probably is the more important paragraph in the speech, and I'd like to know if you agree with me, is when Mr. Reagan said, it will be my intention to curb the size and influence of the federal establishment and to demand recognition of the distinction between the powers granted to the federal government and those reserved to the states or the people. All of us needs to be reminded that the federal government did not create the states created the federal government. I think
that is central to his message. This is Jimmy Carter taking his leave of the Capitol, being shown which way to go, which car to get into, and he is on his way now to Andrews Air Force Base. Tom Pettit, who covers the Congress for NBC, is standing by with the Speaker of the House, Thomas O'Neill.
O'Neill is talking to us here about the account he received of the hostages.
Phone rang in the car when we were coming down, and the time was about 11:30, and President Carter took the phone call, and he had a conversation, and when he hung up, he said, I am reliably informed that within 15 minutes the planes will be taking off from Tehran, and that is the last of any information that we have received.
No confirmation since then, sir?
Not to my knowledge, and I've been in the company of President for the last hour.
What was the reaction in the car?
Oh, of course, it was delight. There was delight that it was finally over.
What did he say to the new president on the subject when they arrived out front?
Well, no, I'm not at liberty to say anything other than general conversation was that telephone call, and we talked of a myriad of things along the line.
As the leader of the Democratic majority in the House, what are your feelings about the hostage resolution seeming now to come to climax just at the end of the Democratic president's term?
Well, as an American, of course, I'm happy that it's all over, and I trust that it's all over. I still haven't got the final knowledge in my mind as to whether they have left. Maybe you people could inform me of that, because I truly don't know. But it would be great for the country to have that behind us, and we would face it with happiness, of course. But
would it free the new administration of that burden?
It would. It would. The president was very interesting. I think he gave a very simplistic speech today. I think he spoke to the heart of what America is talking about and what they elected him on. Too much government along the line. It's not as simple, of course, as to change things as some people would believe to be, but I think the president realized that. We've had our caucuses, the Democratic Party, we're Americans first, and we want to see this president move the government, and we'll do everything and cooperate every way we possibly can.
Thank you very much, Speaker O'Neill. Now back to the booth.
The matter of whether the hostages are out or not still is somewhat uncertain. However, we have an important bulletin from the Associated Press. The Pars news agency, which is the official Iranian news agency, reported this evening from Tehran that an Algerian 727 jetliner carrying the 52 American hostages took off from Tehran's Mehrabad airport. Now, that is from Pars, the official news agency in Iran, and it looks as though that is the first official word from the Iranians. The way Pars works and the way news agencies work, it may have taken some time for that bulletin to be put out by them, so it is certainly possible that the hostages in Iran lifted off before Ronald Reagan raised his hand and took the oath of office.
It also appears, just listening to Tom Pettit's interview with the Speaker, is that the entire government, old and new, was probably not very well informed. They were out there on the inaugural platform. I didn't see intelligence officers running messages back and forth to tell the president in his ear that this had happened, and they sat out there pretty much in ignorance of what was going on. The Speaker said that the phone rang and said, not yet. So we'll just pass on our wire bulletins as best we get them. I just wanted to make one comment about the president's speech. I think it is true that it was not a majestic speech in comparison to other past inaugurals. It was not a great uplift speech. It was a very specific, nitty-gritty sort of statement of where he intends to go, and those kinds of speeches are sometimes more meaningful than the great uplifters, because we're uplifted and then within 6 months we fall down on our faces again. I think the one thing that the speech did, if it did anything, was made us feel good. It made us feel good to be Americans, made us feel good about what we had done in the past, and gave us some sense that we could do it again.
Well, that's where we stand now, and we've got a lot more. We've got the parade. We've got a number of other things coming up. We'll see the new president and his wife at lunch, and we'll be talking with a friend of his from Hollywood who has just arrived here in our anchor booth, Jimmy Stewart, who first came to Washington in 1933 as a man named Jefferson Smith, and Mr. Smith goes to Washington. We'll have that after this. Is that the old guard in the back there that I see, Roger?
Sure is. You mentioned Mrs. Bush's accident. You can see on, or could have seen a minute ago, that bandage on her left leg.
Yep. Well, I'm amazed when you think about people, wives and husbands, when the husbands are running for president or some big office, that they don't get injured more often. They're forever climbing in and out of cars, up and down on platforms. They have a pretty good safety record, given the lives they have to lead. Weather has turned cloudy now, still holding at 56 degrees.
That's fife and drum. There they are.
There's the old guard. good.
It's neat, yeah. You know Mrs. Bush and Mrs. Reagan coordinated those colors.
And so did those troops. They're also in red and blue.
They've handed me a note that informs me that the general is a major general. I knew that much. I had to confess I didn't know his name. His name is Major General Arter, A-R-T-E-R. And I still am not sure, but I assume him to be the commanding officer of the military district of Washington. President Reagan throws sort of a high Western California salute, doesn't it? That's
Yes, he
a little
does.
habit of his.
Now, the top of that presidential limousine, as you know, has a couple of hatches in it that can be opened up, and one in the back would enable the new president to stand and wave to the crowds. He may do that this afternoon. We don't know for sure. Security won't say in advance anyway.
Did you see a man hurriedly pass by that picture carrying a black bag?
No, but it's about time. The black
That's the
bag
one.
is what we call the black bag, ladies and gentlemen, is the military officer assigned to be with the president night and day. People do it in shifts, carrying the codes in case there should be a nuclear war, and it's called the black bag, sometimes the football. That is one of the more awesome responsibilities that a president inherits when he takes his oath of office up here on Jenkins Hill.
Now tell me, John, do I understand that the presidential motorcade will follow down Pennsylvania Avenue, this honor guard, at their pace?
I'm going to look that up.
If that's true, that'll take 30 minutes for them to get to the White House, won't it?
I'm going to look it up, and we're going to pause for this message.
Swinging out, at least the presidential parade will be, the car will be swinging out of the Capitol Plaza, and we're starting the long trek down Pennsylvania Avenue.
I think I can answer your question now. I found it. We're not certain about this. There, of course, is the car, and you can see Mrs. Reagan's red dress in the lower left-hand window there. As I understand it now, that the parade goes one way, and the car bearing the president and the first lady does not follow the parade moving slowly, but goes on ahead of it and enters the reviewing stand, which you just saw with Tom and Brokaw and Jane Pauley there, so that the Reagans will be able to see the whole parade, I think, from the reviewing stand on the White House lawn.
Well, then why did they review their military guard up here? Because I kept hearing that they weren't going to get to see it down there.
I don't know. I'm very confused.
Well, they're ready anyhow.
I think we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But if the pace of those marching bands wasn't all that fast, I wonder if they're going to do it. Then that means they won't get to the White House until 3:30 or so, or in 35 minutes from now.
I guess the wait now, John, must be just allowing the foot soldiers to clear the hill and get out of the way so these cars can get down below.
It looks as though it's kind of threatening weather. It doesn't seem so here in Washington. And there's the presidential limousine taking its place in the parade. And they're both up.
Now, you remember 4 years ago when the car swung around the corner out of the Capitol Plaza and started down the hill, suddenly the car stopped and out they came.
Mm-hmm.
And what we saw for the next, what was it, 45 minutes? Was the President of the United States walking hand in hand with his wife?
And it was a beautiful day, and it was...
And it was probably the most dramatic thing of the whole day. You talked about his speech being, you know, generally an average speech. That walk down Capitol Hill was probably the most important thing he did that day. So much attention falls naturally on the president, but of course Mrs. Reagan, as Jimmy Stewart said earlier, is a co-equal in this marriage, and she resents very much what she calls the question, and the question being, how much influence will you have on your husband? She says that I will make my views known, and generally she says he knows my views. First ladies are a favorite subject of newspaper people and the media. Ellen Goodman, a columnist with the Boston Globe, recently did a column about first ladies, and all first ladies, she says, are too something. Dolly Madison was too fat, and Sarah Polk was too stuffy, and Margaret Taylor was too coarse. She smoked a pipe. Julia Grant was too plain. Mary Lincoln was too dumpy. Amy Eisenhower was too tacky. Jackie Kennedy too snappy. Pat Nixon too stiff. Betty Ford too candid. Rosalind Carter, she said, too ambitious. Her nickname was the Steel Magnolia.
Mm-hmm.
And now Nancy Reagan will be, I'm sure by the time it's all over, too something to somebody. But we'll have to suspend judgment about that.
You know, one of the interesting things, Roger, is that we have just seen a president depart whose best friend in life, Mr. Carter, is his wife, Rosalind. There's no question in my mind about that. She was closer to him than anybody, than Ham Jordan or Jody Powell or Charles Curbo or anybody. And we are looking now at a new president who has a similar relationship with his wife. They're the Bushes, of course. And you do not hear it said about Barbara and George Bush that they rely and depend upon each other and need each other for comfort as much as you do about the Reagans, and certainly as you did about the Carters.
Well, I suppose with the Bushes... simply because of the nature of her life, created an independent life for herself because of his absence, and so she's a strong, intelligent, independently minded woman who has her own set of friends here in Washington. Well, so many political wives do.
And 5 very successful children, and she says that she raised them, I think I've got these figures right, in the first 16 years of their marriage, they had 17 separate places to live. And I think that's a trial that a political wife, we spend too little time thinking about how difficult things can be for them. It hasn't been easy for Nancy Reagan with Ronald Reagan on the road as much as he's been on the road.
We've got reporters, John, along the parade route. We've heard from Andrea Mitchell, and we've now got George Lewis along the Pennsylvania Avenue. George?
I'm on Constitution Avenue. north of the Capitol, where the Reagans have just turned the corner. The scene that they'll be seeing in just a few minutes as they head west on Constitution Avenue, north of the Capitol, is streets lined with crowds on both sides. As they get to the west side of the Capitol, the crowd swells quite large. It'll be a few minutes before they get there because the parade is behind the bands, heading at about march speed. So I imagine we'll be averaging about 2 or 3 miles an hour as we go down Constitution and then turn on to Pennsylvania Avenue en route to the White House. And very enthusiastic crowds waving at the Reagans and the Bushes as they go down, heading toward the White House. Roger?
Well, it's me. Thinking about that photo truck that you see right in front of the Reagans, they have a wonderful view of the people on either side, but looking ahead, this is an interesting shot. You see the white truck with the television transmitting equipment on it, and just to the left there, you a moment ago had a better view of it, the truck full of photographers. There's a series of steps built on the back of that truck so they can take this picture. This is what the photographers see, and the Reagans, when they look forward, see just about only the photographers. They don't see much of the avenue.
There we go again, getting in the way of the story, huh?
Well, it's a media world. They're coming down the hill now on Constitution Avenue. And while they're going at this marching pace, we will pause and be back with more coverage of the inaugural parade after this. There to the left of your screen, Mr. Bush's familiar wave to the crowd. Stop draft registration, it says. Keep your promise.
Traditionally the first musical unit in the inaugural procession, and has been since Calvin Coolidge's inaugural parade in 1923.
I believe the correct title is The Caissons Go Rolling Along. Or maybe it's The Army Goes Rolling Along. We've got...
At least we know the words to the song, Tom.
That's right. Called Pershing's Home.
Reviewing stand appears to be going in time to the music. Those are American flags being waved back and forth rhythmically.
We'll have continuing coverage of this inaugural parade for President Ronald Reagan, and we'll have coverage of former President Jimmy Carter arriving back home in Plains, Georgia, in the south of Georgia, in just a few moments. But first, this message. The ceremonial presidency has returned to Washington, D.C. There's a special wooden sidewalk that they're walking along that has been constructed especially for this day. Ronald Reagan first began running for president in 1968. His dream is realized on this day. It must be becoming very clear to him as he enters this position now to join his friends, his supporters, his advisors, his helpmates in this new administration.
Mayor Barry of Washington has arrived.
And Mrs. Barry. In the blue outfit is Barbara Bush. We'll be seeing them join the Reagans in the front row. Mrs. Reagan giving tiny kisses to her members of her family, including her daughter-in-law there, married to Ronald Reagan. And the president now is talking to his brother Neil and his sister-in-law. And saying hello to his grandson, Cameron. There's a lot of talk during the course of this campaign about whether he was too old to be president of the United States. He remains, after all that he's been through, one of the healthiest, most vigorous-looking 69-year-olds that you can possibly imagine. 49 years old. Whatever. He looks in the pink of condition on this day. Okay, what will happen is that Ronald Reagan will say hello to some more folks. He'll sit down in those chairs and he'll begin to review his parade. And we'll be back with all of that right after this word.
For 30 years at Hollywood, where hot lights cause dry hair, I never found anything better for dull, dry hair than Alberto VO5 conditioning hairdressing. We use a touch of VO5's concentrated formula before...
Omar Bradley, followed by the U.S. Marine Band. The President's Own, it's called. They take up their position in the White House reception rooms. Whenever the President has an occasion of one kind or another, you'll be hearing them a great deal in the next 4 years.
This is the Culver Military Academy equestrian unit. Tom, for 5 weeks, a blacksmith was engineering special slip-proof shoes for those horses. 5 weeks, mind you. There's no ice on Pennsylvania Avenue.
However, it was so cold here for one of General Grant's inaugurations that everything froze. The food and 300 canaries that had been brought in to accompany the musicians. They froze right in their cages. That won't happen today because there are neither canaries nor sub-freezing temperatures.
This year they'd be wearing little tuxedos and it'd be real warm.
From West Point, United States Military Academy Band.
You'll notice, Tom, nobody stops in this parade in front of the reviewing stand until it gets all the way down. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir will be allowed to stop. Nobody else. Keep it snappy.
21-year-old Stan March of Houston is the first cadet to achieve both the rank of brigade commander and captain of the Military Academy's football team since Pete Dawkins in 1959. He's leading the cadets in this parade today from West Point. The long gray line.
Tom, they used to march the entire military academy, all of the midshipmen from the Naval Academy. I'm told it took about a half hour just to march them all by. They haven't appeared here in some years, all together.
In 1913, you know who marched in that group of cadets in this parade for Woodrow Wilson?
Who?
Dwight Eisenhower. So there may be a future president there again today.
Alexander Haig, of course, is a graduate of that institution. We are, this parade is coming to us by region, not state by state. Not every state will be represented in the parade, but we're beginning with the Northeast, and this is from Connecticut, the Connecticut Governor's Horse Guard. And I told you there are going to be a lot of horses in this parade, and I don't know necessarily one breed for another, but I read that these horses are of mixed breed. Pride of Springfield, Pennsylvania disposed, Tom, Cardinal O'Hara High School, the Bicentennial Marching Band. It was formed during the Bicentennial in 1976, and that's why it is so named. They say many of the bands were chosen, partially cynics would say, because they were telegenic. Well, they sound nice too, but these are red, white, and blue, very colorful, interesting costumes. And they were telegenic.
And award-winning bands. In the O'Hara case, they have received excellent in every competition in which they've been engaged. This is the 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The oldest military organization in continuous service in the United States Army. The group founded November 17, 1774. Served under George Washington. Ronald Reagan, a fine judge of horsemanship, appreciating all of this. Now, let's go to Plains, Georgia. Portsmouth High School Band. We'll be seeing more of this parade all afternoon. That's from Rhode Island. Now there's Jimmy Carter.
It's going to have plenty of rain. There's no way for me to describe how I feel now, but I would like to say, although I haven't had a chance to see my bed either Sunday night or Monday night, that in the last few hours I've had a lot of very emotional experiences. I won't mention them all, but I would say that one of them was this morning. I won't say exactly what time yet. I got word from sure sources that both planes in Iran were lined up on the runway, ready to take off. That was a thrilling experience for me. The next time was when I came out to Andrews Air Force Base, having had a chance to serve as president of the greatest nation on earth, and stood there with my wife and the vice president and his wife Joan, and heard the Star-Spangled Banner played, and they fired the 21-gun salute for our president. And my heart was filled with a realization of what it means to be free, and what it means to be a citizen of the greatest and the strongest and the most decent nation on earth. And I had to fight back the tears. And for the last 14 months, Rosalynn and I and the Secretaries of State and others have stayed in close touch with the hostage family. And as George said, as I came toward him in Air Force One, Mrs. Schaefer, who is the wife of the senior military man being held by the hostages, said to me, Mr. President, I hope someday you'll have a chance to meet my husband. And I put my arms around him, and George was watching, and I said, I'll be with him tomorrow, and I'll tell him you love him. That was another experience that I'll never forget. All emotional, and this is the fourth one that I'll mention. It's coming back home to the town where I was born and raised, and seeing the streets filled with my friends. It's a deeply emotional experience for me, and I might say that when those planes were lined up, when they played the Star-Spangled Banner, when I put my arms around Mrs. Schaefer, and when I saw this crowd of friends and neighbors, all three were emotional, but they weren't sad. Every single one of them, including coming back to Georgia, is a happy experience for me, and I thank God for it. There are still restraints on me, some self-imposed, some agreements with foreign nations about mentioning the American hostages who have been held so long in Iran. But I have not had a chance yet to make a statement about them. And I thought because of the intense interest in these 52 people around the world that I would say a few words to you about them. Just a few moments ago, on Air Force One, before we landed at Warner Robins, I had received word officially for the first time that the aircraft carrying the 52 American hostages had cleared Iranian airspace on the first leg of the journey home, and that every one of the 52 hostages was alive, was well, and free. It's impossible for me to realize for any of us how they feel on that plane, because they recognize that they are hostages no more, they are prisoners no more, and they're coming back to this land that we all love. Our diplomats will be arriving sometimes in the near future, I can't yet tell you exactly when, in Algiers. The Algerians, the last few weeks, have been real heroes. They have literally worked day and night, from their president, their foreign minister, the president of their national bank and others, to try to gain the freedom of the American hostages. And I want to express my personal and also my political, official, and public thanks to the people of Algeria. They will be flying on 2 Algerian planes, they are now. They'll refuel in Athens, Greece. After they land in Algiers, they will transfer to American planes, and they will fly from there to Germany, land near Frankfurt in a military air base, and go from there about 30 miles away to the hospitals in Wiesbaden, Germany, where American doctors and others will be waiting for them. Former Secretary Cyrus Vance will be there to shake their hands and to put his arms around them when they come down from the airplane. I had the plane standing by in Washington with Secretary Vance in charge, and I directed the plane take off the moment the hostage plane wheeled cleared the ground. After a brief rest in Germany, 3 or 4 days probably, then the hostages will come back home to be reunited with their families. As suggested yesterday morning by our new president, Reagan, early tomorrow morning, I will leave for Germany to welcome our hostages to freedom. And I know I will take with me
Okay, Palmer's here too.
the joy and the relief of our entire nation. Throughout this time of trial, we Americans have stood as one, united in our prayers, steadfast in our concerns for fellow Americans in peril. I doubt if any time in our history more prayers have reached heaven for any American than have been given to God in the last 14 months. We've achieved at the end of this crisis the 2 objectives that I set for this nation and for myself when they were first seized: to secure their safety and their ultimate release, and to do so on terms that would always preserve the honor and the dignity and the best interests of our nation. As I said a few hours ago in a brief press announcement, the essence of this agreement is that as our people are freed, we're releasing a part of the assets belonging to Iran, which I froze by presidential order after our embassy was seized and our hostages were taken. There will also be established a firm, established procedure involving binding arbitration completely in accordance with American law and international law to resolve any remaining claims that might exist by American people against Iran or vice versa. Our people held captive and their families here at home have borne this ordeal with courage and with honor. Our nation acted as a great nation ought to act, not only with justified outrage at a despicable and illegal act, purpose and constant restraint in the face of severe provocation, working always to uphold the law in the face of lawlessness in Iran. We've kept faith with our principles and our people, and as a result, we've reached this day of joy and thanksgiving. In closing,